You're listening to the ESO Network, your station for all things geek.
Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, television, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today, we look at Broadway musicals. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Well, gentlemen, I have to defer to you because I'm a West Coaster, and we don't know enough about Broadway musicals to consider ourselves anything other than a good audience. But I know that you guys are have been in the past ardent theater goers and grew up with the theater. We didn't. So, Julian, get us started here. Break out those dancing shoes.
Well, I just realized, guys, that it will be in a few months, 70 years of going to Broadway, which is not a bad title. First play I go to see, I'm just starting my teenage years, and it's Mary Martin and Cyril Ritchard in Peter Pan. Now, there's a time in that show, Mary's flying all around the stage, of course. Cyril Ritchard couldn't be funnier and greater as Captain Hook. And there's a moment where Tinkerbell, the fairy, looks like she's going to die unless the kids in the audience bring her back to life. And how we have to do that is to say, we believe. I find myself screaming, we believe, we believe. 12, 13 years old now, people are getting pregnant. But not then. Not then. I'm believing in Tinkerbell to come back. Mary Martin was a great Broadway star. Great. I saw her in The Sound of Music, the original. I saw her come into Hello, Dolly, and I saw her, guys, in an interesting play called I Do, I Do. It was a two-hander with Robert Preston and Mary Martin. One hell of a musical to sit through, based on the play The Four-Poster.
So what did
you see her in South Pacific, Julian?
I didn't see her in that, Arthur.
She was a star.
That's what made her a star. And also, she did a song called My Heart Belongs to Daddy.
Yes.
In another show, and that's really what made her. Now, I throw out to the three of you, who was her famous son?
Larry Hagman.
Larry Hagman.
Okay, Arthur, I'm giving him my dancing shoes.
Yes.
Okay. Arthur, what about you? You've been going to theater even longer than me.
Well, she was, Mary Martin was a favorite of everybody. She was a classic star for Broadway. The first show I ever saw, my folks took me to see Finian's Rainbow, which became a terrible movie many years later, but what a great show that was. Ella Logan, a guy named Donald Richards, and David Wayne played the Jewish leprechaun, the little elf, the guy.
Isn't that written by the same guys who wrote The Wizard of Oz, or the same guy, Yip Harburg?
Yip Harburg and something, Burt Lane, I believe. Some great music.
Burton Lane, I think so.
Things in Glockamora. Little Brook Still Shining. It's a great show, guys. Let me tell you. So anyway, I see this show as a kid. I'm a little kid. Years and years go by. I walk into a meeting in Brentwood. Steve, you'll know just where this is. And Julian, you will too. 26th Street, there's this red barn, this little shopping center thing, and there's a diner in there. And I go into a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the guys I'm meeting with are not there. But I take a look over, and there's almost nobody in the diner. And there's David Wayne sitting there. This would be about 1991 or something. So many years have gone by. He's an old guy. We've got his granny glasses, reading a newspaper. And I just walked over to him and said, Mr. Wayne, I have to tell you, I saw you in Finian's Rainbow so many years ago. He said, that's wonderful. Sit down, So sure, I sit down with David Wayne. What was your favorite song? And I said, my favorite song was your song. It was, When Susan with Susan, I'm choosing with Sharon, I'm Karen. Yeah, well, my heart is beating wildly. And all of a sudden, he starts singing with me.
When I'm not near the girl,
I love.
I love
near the girl.
I love the girl I'm near. That was the song.
That's the song, and he is singing this in the diner at the table joyfully with his granny glasses with newspaper, smiling ear to ear. Well, my heart is beating wildly, and it's all because you're near. When I am not near, it's just what a moment. And all of a sudden, the people behind the counter start applauding, and it was great.
Yeah. You know what I loved, Arthur? For Sharon, I'm Karen. For Susan, I'm choosing.
Yeah.
I'm faithful to who's is near.
I'll throw in a Twilight Zone aside, because I always associate David Wayne with one of the great Twilight Zones where he plays a hypochondriac who makes a pact with the devil to live forever. And he realizes soon after that he doesn't want to live forever. And it's David Wayne classic. David Wayne's a great character.
You know what it says on the hypochondriac's tombstone, Steve?
What?
I told you so. That's what it says. David Wayne was a great Broadway star and made some wonderful movies like 10 to Trap, years later with Sinatra.
Sinatra and Debbie Reynolds.
But Broadway shows. I also saw a show called Where's Charlie when I was a kid with Ray Bolger, who literally jumps off the stage when he's singing Once in Love with Amy, and he's wearing a dress because he's Charlie's aunt. And he goes up and down the aisle singing this song. He did it about 8 times. People wouldn't let him off the stage.
Would you guys say that Broadway musicals are pretty much native to America? I know there are musicals in other countries, but Broadway musicals, do we produce those pretty much? We're the big supplier, or do they come from everywhere?
No, we are the big supplier. It's one of the few, that and jazz are one of the few things in show business that we originated. So Broadway musicals are big, of course. In my case, I've been so fortunate living in New York all my life to see so many incredible actors and actresses in musicals. I mean, you start out with someone like Zero Mostel doing A Funny Thing Happened and Fiddler on the Roof. I mean, he's brilliant in both. It's just great to see. What I miss, because I'm old, it looks like, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Lerner and Lowe, Kander and Egg, Bach and Harnick, Adler and Ross. These guys were fantastic. And then you have people like the composers like Frank Lesser and Irving Berlin and Cole Porter, who wrote both the music and the lyrics. It never ceases to amaze me that these men can write both extraordinarily. So,
Julian, you know what's unbelievable is that when these guys, the golden days of Broadway, were writing these great songs and for these great shows, ticket prices were like $5 to go to see those shows. Today, you're paying a couple $100 to see whatever. I want to add, Steve, England, somewhere along the line, England came into play. And you started seeing things like Phantom of the Opera come out of there. Les Mis, I think, came out of England, did it not? Les Mis,
I think it did. It did. I saw it in London before it came to New York.
Yeah, didn't that Twiggy show come from London? Am I wrong?
Well, there's a bunch of shows that came from London, mostly from Andrew Lloyd Webber.
Andrew Lloyd Webber,
did have, despite the fact that he's kind of derided and has had a lot of flops, he's also had a lot of successes, and it shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, whether it be Phantom of the Opera or Evita or a lot of the musicals, even Cats, giving the great song Memories that our friend Betty Buckley introduced, and of course Barbara Streisand made famous. And speaking of Barbara Streisand, that's where I first saw her, on stage in a play called I Can Get It For You Wholesale, before she did Funny Girl. And that was the last time Barbara did a musical 8 times a week.
Well, here's a question I have, and forgive my naivete. In terms of songwriting, you often hear the words Tin Pan Alley. Where did the name Tin Pan Alley come from? Do you guys know?
I certainly don't. No.
Well, it came from Lower Broadway initially, like the 1920s and all that. It evolved into where the Brill Building, which is where Jack Dempsey's restaurant was, and also 1650 Broadway, where all of the songwriters between the Brill Building and the 1650 Broadway you had all of the songwriters who were writing the rock and roll stuff of the 1950s, even from the late post-war 1940s. That was called Tin Pan Alley. Between that would be Julian Brill Building
in the 40s,
high 40s,
yeah.
But the 16, 15, I think was a little higher, maybe 52nd Street. But it was in that area that if you'd walk around, you'd see everybody. I mean, I used to, go there for reasons of the show business and stuff. There's like nothing every day to see Burt Bacharach walking around, the Shirelles, Neil Sedaka, Howie Greenfield, who nobody's heard of except people in the music business. Howie Greenfield was a brilliant writer, wrote all those great songs with Neil Sedaka. But that was called Tin Pan Alley. But I think the Tin Pan Alley that before that, from the 20s, had to do really mostly with Broadway. The Tin Pan Alley I'm talking about had to do with pop music of the late 40s, 50s. According Irving Berlin's office was where, Julian? It wasn't really in Tin Pan Alley. You visited that place?
Who was it? Whose office?
Irving Berlin.
Oh, no, I only spoke to him on the phone. I never visited his office.
I delivered a package to his office. I think it was off of Fifth Avenue.
Probably.
Little office.
I don't think he was on the west side at all. I don't think so.
Yeah, but he had a little office with these golden bars or bronze bars and this little old lady sitting behind the counter.
Yes.
And Eddie Fisher told me a great story about Irving Berlin. So he becomes a big song star, Eddie Fisher, and he's Jewish. So he gets a call one day from Irving Berlin's assistant that Mr. Berlin would like to meet you, Mr. Fisher. He's like 23, 24 years old. He goes over to meet Irving Berlin. He's sitting in his office. He says, you're doing good, young man. I like the way you sing, but I don't want you to have a tear in your voice unless you really mean it. Because every now and then I hear a tear in your voice. You don't do that. It's got to be real. He says, now go inside. I have a duffel bag in the locker inside, and there's all these things that have never come out. These songs I've written for years. Stick your hand in, pick one out, and go make it a hit. Berlin, who was nothing but a hit maker. So Eddie walks into the office, sticks his hand in. He comes up with a thing and looks. He says, "Count your blessings. I'll take this one, Mr. Berlin." He says, "Go ahead, make it a hit." And he did, and then he put it into White Christmas.
That's a great
story here. According to Wikipedia, Tin Pan Alley originally referred to a specific location on West 28th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues in the Flower District of Manhattan, as commemorated by a plaque on 28th Street between Broadway and 6th. Okay.
All right.
But it evolved into the high 40s and 50s, Steve.
It did.
Yeah.
It did. Steve, you say that you did not go to Broadway, but you did go to theater. Was there any show as a young boy that really affected you, that you really loved?
It's interesting. I was trying to figure out where I saw my early music theater, and I think what I did was when I went with my parents to Las Vegas occasionally would have some musical theater. I know it's interesting. South Pacific was the first movie I ever saw, the original with Mitzi Gaynor and Ray Walston. Sure. But I didn't discover musical theater probably until, wow. I don't know if I've still... I don't think I've discovered it yet.
Last week, you're going to say? Last week?
I took my mother...
In all of the areas of show business, and there are many areas of it. There's movies, there's Broadway, there's concert, there's God knows what. There's nothing like a great Broadway musical. Nothing like it. It stands by itself. It's special. People go and remember these shows forever and ever. My partner picked up a couple of tickets one night, about 1970 thereabout, and said, let's go see a show. We're in New York on some business. We had dinner at the old Homestead or something. It was a great restaurant.
Well,
we went to see a show. I didn't even think of it. I didn't know about the show until that day, but it was a revival. And we went into with a 3/4 audience. It wasn't full. And I went and looked at a show called No Nanette with Ruby Keeler, a revival in 1970. Loved it. Bobby Van.
Yeah.
Great songs. Picture me upon your knee. T for two for T. But an old style. Irving Caesar may have been one of the writers on that. But that was an oldie but a goodie. But again, special. I'm talking about it now, and that's not what you call Phantom of the Opera. That's I loved a show called They're Playing Our Song, written by Marvin Hamlish and Carol Bayer Sager.
Neil Simon.
Yeah, and Neil Simon. I saw it with Robert Klein and Lucy Arnaz. Great show. But this would not be considered My Fair Lady. It's just another the Broadway show. It was great.
When Fiddler on the Roof debuted on Broadway, who was Tevye?
Zero Mostel.
It was Zero Mostel.
Yeah. Then he was replaced by Luther Adler, part of the great Adler family of Stella Adler. And then he was replaced by Herschel Bernardi, who we knew as Lieutenant Jacoby on Peter Gunn, among other places. And then there were more coming in. It was like Hello, Dolly. We started out with Carol Channing. We ended up with Martha Ray, Betty Grable. As I said, even the best one I ever saw of Dolly's, and I saw about 4 of them, was an all-black cast with Pearl Bailey as Dolly and Cab Calloway as Horace. And I'm telling you, she came out and she talked about how tired she was doing the show as Dolly, though. She didn't drop character, but she was sensational.
Julian, Pearl Bailey, who most people don't know of, God, she was probably a Babe Ruth of entertainment.
Yes.
Pearl Bailey was incredible. So when they put her in Hello, Dolly, she was kind of like perfect, just in its own way, as was Bette Midler when she came back and did it recently.
That's right. That's right. It's true. It's an amazing thing. The guy that I saw as a kid who kept doing musicals and then he became big in television and movies was Jerry Orbach, who had a terrific voice. I never saw him in a musical in a movie. He may have, but I don't remember. But boy, he was in the Threepenny Opera. He was in Fantastics. He was in Chicago. He was the original male lead, Billy, whatever his name is, in Chicago. So he really was and by the way, one of the nicest human beings I ever spent time with. Just a terrific guy. Oh, and Promises. He was in the lead. He was the original.
I saw him in Promises in Boston.
Oh.
And the day after, a great show, a great story about that show with relating to Burt Bacharach caught pneumonia while they were up there in Boston. And Hal David went to visit him the next day at Mass General. And he brought him the news. He said, Burt, we need another song. I don't know what kind of condition you're in here. You look like you're dead, but we need another song. So the song they decided to do was called What Do You Get When You Fall in Love? You get a lot. So they wrote that song in the hospital bed. And the way pneumonia got into the lyric was phonia pneumonia, and it's in the lyric.
That's right.
From Promises. Anyway.
The girl gets a pneumonia, and after that, she'll never phone you.
Never phone you. The funny story, the great story I've got. So anyway, the next day, our offices were in the Park Square building in Park Square in Boston. And I'm walking through the National Shawmut Bank, which you could walk through to get to the elevators and all out of the building. And there's Jerry Orbach sitting there. I'd seen him the night before. And I just, by instinct, I just said, Jerry, I saw the show last night. It was great. And he was sitting there with the bank executive. He said, I need money so bad. It's funny,
Did you offer him at least a 20?
No, he was dealing with the bank executive who was on the phone. So, but he was great in that show.
And he was great in that movie, Crimes and Misdemeanors. Boy, was he good in that.
And he plays Jennifer Grey's father in Dirty Dancing.
Yes, absolutely. Mike, what about you? Where is Broadway in your life, or theater, or musical theater?
Oh, I've had it all throughout my life and everything. I grew up outside Washington, D.C., but also, and so we used to go see a lot of plays when they came to the Warner Theater or to the Kennedy Center. But we also had family up in New York. So we used to go to Broadway as like special treats and such. Like got to see Yul Brynner in when he did The King and I, his revival. And I was a little kid. It was amazing, etc., and so forth. And he was just awesome. But we grew up with musicals and always loved. We saw Fiddler. We saw, my grandmother has a story about when Fiddler first opened on Broadway. My grandmother was an immigrant from Poland. Before World War II. And so she understood the Yiddish and the Hebrew that they used in it. She was sitting next to two Catholic priests at the showing of it. And she was telling them how, explaining to them what they were saying and everything. And so she was their interpreter for them. And it was just awesome. But, we saw, Funny Girl. We saw so many different, plays as time went on. And we even got to see, as I got older, as a young adult, I got to go to Broadway and I got to see Miss Saigon there with the helicopter. And we got to see, I got to see Tommy on Broadway. I got to see Cats. Saw Phantom. I got to see Les Mis, and and even to this day, we still go to see theater all the time. Here in Atlanta, we have the tours that come, but we have the Fox Theater in Atlanta, and we just recently saw the new Beetlejuice musical that they did, which was wonderful. If you ever get a chance, go see it. We also, of course, we saw The Lion King, which, we took my son to go see that. And the puppetry in that was just amazing. And they take it into the audience. It's just awesome what they do.
Anybody here ever hear of a guy named Davis Gaines, Davis Gaines? It was Davis Gaines who's probably played Tevye and Fiddler in Phantom of the Opera, not Fiddler, but in Phantom of the Opera. He's probably played the Phantom more than anybody traveling the world with it. Davis is just great. Long story short, I'm hanging out. A lot of times I would office at Warner Brothers in the musical, in the head of the music department's office. And Gary Lamel, Gary's sweetheart, and we'd sit there, and every now and then a guy would stick his head in and say, "Hey, would anybody here like a Diet Coke or a ginger ale or something?" And somebody would say, "No, David, thanks anyway." And he'd go away. And so so that would happen. And now I see if I can get some tickets for me and my wife and kid to see Phantom of the Opera. And we're told by Gary's secretary that David would like to see me after the show. And I should go back to his thing and go backstage and say hi to David. I said, sure. I didn't know what she meant. Long story short, the show ends. It's fantastic. And of course, if you've seen it, you know that he keeps the mask on all the time. So we go backstage. I don't know who David is. I don't know. He wanted to see me, and I go back there, and he comes out of the dressing room with a towel on his neck. His mask is off, and it's Davis Gaines, who I thought was David, who was asking us for Coca-Cola or ginger ale. He would office there, and he would use one of the secretaries send out autographed pictures and stuff like that. So I got a total shock that was Davis Gaines, who I knew he was just a sweet, sweet guy. He was great in the show. There's been a lot of Davises. You know who played Tevye more than anybody, I think, Julian? Theodore Beckel, traveling the world.
Yeah, he did all over the world. He did. I have to tell you that having produced a big Broadway musical, as I did, Bullets Over Broadway, it is a very, very big thing to produce a musical. And these days, if I told you guys what the average musical on Broadway cost, you wouldn't believe it, most likely. But it's approximately $23 to $24 million to do a musical now. Now, the reason that the ticket prices are so high is because the cost of doing the musical is so high. That doesn't make the theater goer happy to hear. They don't care what the budget is. They don't go because of the budget. But it's a real problem. It's becoming, Broadway, a place for the rich, and that frightens me for the future of it.
Julian, really, there's a flip side to that crazy cost of what it costs to produce a show on Broadway, because it's a crapshoot, and to some extent, it's always been that. But
yes.
The fact is that if that show ever hits on Broadway, and sometimes even if it doesn't hit but gets enough notoriety, it now travels the world at ticket prices that are unheard of. You can play in small towns in Illinois and be getting $110 a ticket. So they make fortune. You know this. Didn't you have a successful show with Jerry Lewis that traveled and did business?
Yes, Damn Yankees.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. No, it's you can, of course, but ironically enough, you can make more money on a hit musical if you hit than anything in show business,
yes.
More than a movie, more than a television show. It's unbelievable, but it's like going wildcatting for oil. You know, most of the time you don't get any oil at all. But I want to talk about some flops, because those are the ones that sometimes break your heart if you're producing, directing.
Before you get into that, Julian, let me just correct me if I'm wrong. You put that $23 million into the musical. It's true that it could actually close after a limited number of performances because they're not getting in the audiences, so they lose the whole investment. Is that true?
That's correct. That is correct. You can lose it all, and there are shows that have opened and closed the opening night. That's it. One show.
And is that because of the reviewers coming out the next day?
Yes. That's because of that. But they don't have the power they had. When I was a kid going to musicals, if the New York Times didn't give their imprimatur, this was great, you generally were in trouble. New York Times can't stop a musical. They beat the hell out of Wicked and Phantom and Mamma Mia. Public doesn't give a damn what the New York Times says now. In fact, so much so that there used to be gigantic advertising in the Times for theater. It's almost non-existent now. So it's huge changes have happened. But I want to talk about a musical that I saw that I thought was really good and that closed pretty quickly, played 2 months, 8 weeks, with a great song that Arthur loves and I love. It was called Mac and Mabel. And Mac and Mabel starred Robert Preston and Bernadette Peters. It was about Mabel Norman, this wonderful silent film star, and Mac Sennett, this great producer, and their love story. And Jerry Herman wrote the music and lyrics. And there's a song in there that Arthur and I love called I Won't
Bring Me Roses.
I Won't Send Roses. I Won't Send Roses. One of the most beautiful love songs ever written. But that's what happens. You go in, you have everything going for you. Bernadette, you've got Bob Preston, you've got Gower Champion directing it. You've got Jerry Herman writing the music, and the book is by Michael Stewart, who did 42nd Street and Carnival, and it just gone in 2 months.
And why do you think that was?
Well, it's not. He was not nice to Mabel Norman. It was not a typical love story. It was not a love story that would probably do better now than it did then. It wasn't much of a happy ending.
It broke Jerry Herman's heart. To the day he died, he wanted to remake it. He thought he could fix it. That one song, of course, is maybe not in the pantheon of big hits, but it's certainly in the pantheon of great songs.
Yes.
And in the song, it explains that he's an asshole, and he describes him being an asshole. You can bring me flowers, I won't hold the door. I don't remember birthdays, I don't know, all that kind of stuff. But it happens to be a great song. There was another show that ran for one performance, written by Sheldon Harnick and Jerry Bach, who also wrote Fiddler on the Roof.
And She Loves Me.
And
Fiorello.
Yes, and in this particular show, it was called Tenderloin. Bobby Darin found a song in one performance of the show called Artificial Flowers, which was done more as like a dirge in the show. It's similar to Mac the Knife as in the Brecht show.
Three Penny.
He recorded it with an upbeat swing thing and one of the great records of all time called Artificial Flowers. The show ran one performance on Broadway. It happens,
It does. It does. I remember as a young man, again, Mr. Merrick announcing. I mean, that talk about David Merrick, he probably from 1955 to approximately 1980, he did about 80 productions. I mean, that's incredible. And many, many, many hits. But this I'm going to talk about was another show that did not make it. It was based on a Truman Capote short novella called Breakfast at Tiffany's. And, of course, we all know the movie. But this was two of the most gigantic television stars were going to come and do this musical. And they were, in Breakfast, Mary Tyler Moore and Richard Chamberlain. And they were going to do Breakfast at Tiffany's as a musical. And they had a $2 million advance, almost at that time unheard of, gigantic. And on top of it, they had Abe Burrows, one of the great men of directing and writing in theater. And on top of that, they decide that they're out of town and they're not doing well, but he's going to bring it into New York. Merrick does. Merrick fires Abe Burrows, pretty shocking for most of us, and brings in a man, Joseph Anthony, who did not do many musicals, if any. And believe it or not, to help the script, he brings in Edward Albee. This is got to be one of the shocks of most people in theater, because Albee doesn't have any musical background and is known for Virginia Woolf. But anyhow, Merrick is some producer. He is one tough guy. And after four previews, he doesn't let the show open. He closes it. He does not want the people, the reviewers, to have, I guess, their heyday going after it. So that's how tough Broadway is, can be, and will continue to be.
We lived in Boston for years, and we would see a lot of shows that were on their way to New York Broadway and that hadn't been there yet, but they were trying out in Boston and working out the problems they may have had. Saw a show there one night called Golden Boy with Sammy Davis Jr. that was so bad in the Boston previews that Sammy came out after the show and apologized to the audience. He told me, I feel terrible. This show stinks right now, but it's going to get better. I promise you. Please, if you come to New York, see it on Broadway again. And apparently it turned out to be a hit. Correct, Julian? The boxing thing, the dancing?
It did okay because of Sammy. It was Arthur Penn who directed it, by the way.
Really? Okay.
Oh, yeah.
I didn't know that.
Penn directed it, and I saw it, and it still lacked. It was not. It wasn't like Mr. Wonderful, which was the third musical I've ever seen with Sammy Davis Jr. and a comic named Jack Carter, and great song, Mr. Wonderful, and I think Too Close for Comfort. I think.
Yes. Also, without you, I'm nothing. Without you, I'm nowhere. Jack Carter and Sammy.
And one of, again, as a teenager, I'm looking at one of the sexiest women to wiggle on a stage, named Chita Rivera. Yeah. She's one of her first shows she ever did. And at a big party, I went over to her and told her what she had done to me as a teenager. And this rather elderly lady just found that the funniest thing she ever heard.
Yeah. Is she the one that was called the Hoochie Coochie Girl?
No, that was Charo.
That was Charo. Okay.
But I've mentioned to you before that as a teenager, I worked in the Connolly Record Shop in Broadway when West Side Story was across the street at the Winter Garden, and the kids, the people from the singers and dancers would come into the Colony after the show a lot of times, and by mistake one night, my hand actually fell right on the ass of Chita Rivera. I was looking for a record and I found her ass. It was one of those things. And it was
I've heard of a lot of excuses for groping, but looking for a record?
Like touching her behind was like a piece of steel.
Yeah.
Only to learn that dancers' legs were like athletes' legs. They're so exercised. They're so put together that
toned.
The heart. They're very toned.
Yeah.
Another show, Julian. You had a show called this show Bullets Over Broadway. I never saw it, but I did see the Tony broadcast, and they did one of the great dance numbers. That was as much energy as I've ever seen in anything, and I can't believe that show did not run.
You can't believe?
Yeah.
How do you think I feel?
And so, how long did it run, Julian?
A couple of months.
And who were your stars?
That number was "Tain't Nobody's Business," but
right, and it was great.
The stars were Zach Braff from television, and Marin Mazzie, wonderful actress, passed away. Nick Cordero, who Arthur's talking about, died, one of the first people to die of COVID. A young, strapping, beautiful man, kind, loving, very, very sad. We had Vincent Pastore from Sopranos. Had a big cast. It was a very big show, but I couldn't get Woody Allen to take it out of town. I don't like opening in New York first. It's a real problem. There are people just literally sadistically waiting for you. Not a good idea.
Any thoughts on why Woody did not want it to travel?
He didn't want to go out of town. He doesn't like leaving New York. And now, of course, he has to go to Europe to do his movies. But at that point, he didn't have to leave New York, and he didn't. Susan Stroman did a brilliant job, and it's very funny. I've produced about 60 or 70 plays, movies, and theater altogether, and that often the ones that don't make it maybe really are the ones that mean in some ways the most. It's interesting because you put your time and effort and love into it. And I to this day, I don't know what happened. One of the theories is Woody wanted to have music of the period. He didn't want to have a new score. Critics, for some reason in New York, have a whole thing against what they're calling jukebox musicals, which, of course, doesn't mean you can't be successful. I mean, the show on Michael Jackson, MJ, is killing him. And there's been plenty of successful, I guess, Mamma Mia.
Is Jersey Boys considered a jukebox musical?
Sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So there's plenty of successes with it, but that was one of the reasons people talk about. I don't know. I just tell you that there was a wonderful Larry Gelbart line who said, "If Hitler is alive, I hope he's out of town with a musical." So we know what that means. Now let's talk about the woman who needs no microphone. One of the great musical comedy women of all time, Ethel Merman. Ethel Merman was incredible to see on a stage. She would blast. I don't care where you were sitting. You heard every word. I saw her do, I saw her do Annie Get Your Gun, which was incredible. I saw her do Gypsy. She was the original. She also co-starred with Fernando Lamas in a show called Happy Hunting, which was not happy or not very successful. But she was an amazing woman to see. And they interviewed her, guys, and they said to her, "Miss Merman, Helen Hayes throws up on opening night. And some of the great actors are so petrified. How are you on opening night?" She said, "Are you kidding? If they could do what I could do, they'd be up here doing it."
She also participated as the wife in the shortest marriage in history. Yeah. One day, with Ernie Borgnine.
A marriage.
She gave him one good try, and Ernie walked out.
A marriage not in heaven.
I mentioned it to Ernie Borgnine years ago, and I said, "Ernie, what was it like with Ethel?" And he said, "Oh," he put his hand to his head. "Oh my God." He said, "You don't want to know." But she was just loud, but she was great.
Well, the one thing, she was great, and the one thing is, like a Broadway musical, that marriage closed in one night.
One night.
Well, my generation always remembers Ethel Merman in a hospital bed in the movie Airplane.
Oh, it's a mad, mad, mad world.
And she's in that, of course, as well.
Yeah, she's in that as well. Well, we also have to talk about a man that I was so surprised to see have a beautiful baritone voice. I had seen him as a kind of a nerdy teacher in Blackboard Jungle, where they kind of messed up his record collection. And all of a sudden, this man comes out in a musical called Man of La Mancha, named Richard Kiley. It was an extraordinary evening of musical theater. And ironically enough, Arthur's ex-company, United Artists, got the rights. And I thought, oh, wow, this is going to be some musical movie. It was the worst. The worst.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Sophia
believe
Loren. Mm-hmm.
You had Dulcinea, you had Peter O'Toole, you had Jimmy Coco. I mean, you had a lot of names.
Couldn't miss, right, Julian?
Yeah.
Couldn't miss.
You couldn't miss. And that's the thing.
Missed.
And speaking of couldn't miss, think of this, guys. A musical called 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Who's doing the music? Leonard Bernstein. Who's doing the lyrics? Alan J. Lerner. Oh, okay. Bernstein, and this doesn't get better. You never even heard of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And in it, remember Ken Howard? He played the presidents from Georgia.
He's my next door neighbor in Brentwood.
Well, then you definitely heard of him.
Ken Howard, I'll tell you, Ken Howard, true story. Ken Howard, big guy. And so one night, a girl who lives beneath him comes up, bangs on his door. What is it? He says, your feet, you clobber, you walk around all the time. I saw it. You're driving me crazy. I can't even sleep. And P.S., they got married. They got married.
I kind of like that kind of a dating beginning. I don't believe.
He was a good guy.
I think she wanted to meet him.
Now,
how about this one for a sure thing? You want to hear a sure thing?
Yes.
Jerry Lewis in Hell's a Poppin'. How about that? Sure thing?
Sounds great.
Started in Boston, never got out of Boston.
Never came to town.
Never got out of Boston. It was terrible.
They should have put it on a horse with Paul Revere.
Yeah, all right.
Now, being a movie guy, often I will see the movie and then I will be intrigued with seeing the play. And I was always a big fan of Damn Yankees. I love Damn Yankees. So I came to New York once about 30 years ago, and I saw Victor Garber as the devil in a Broadway stage production of Damn Yankees, and it was wonderful. I have to say this, that when you have a musical where every song is terrific, and there are those that I just was in love with that musical. And then somebody sent me a bootleg of Jerry Lewis playing him and although I'm a huge Jerry Lewis fan and almost got a remake of The Errand Boy made as a feature, we had the rights, it didn't work. But I thought that Jerry played a little too fast and loose with the dialogue.
Now, Victor Garber was, in my opinion, and I was part of the production team, was a much better devil than Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
But Jerry Lewis was the one who made us the money.
Oh, I'll bet they were lining up for that. And you took that on the road.
Yeah, that's right. He came to New York, though, before we closed, and then we took it on the road.
I just found the lyric, guys, for this song that was written in 25 minutes at Mass General Hospital to inject into the show Promises, Promises. And the lyric, part of the lyric goes, "What do you get when you fall in love? A guy with a pin to burst your bubble. That's what you get for all your trouble. I'll never fall in love again." The next chorus. "What do you get when you when you know a guy? You get enough germs to catch pneumonia. After you do, he'll never phone you. I'll never fall in love again." Written in 25 minutes with Burt Bacharach in bed with pneumonia.
Well, wait, that was Al David was the guy who wrote it.
Al David wrote the lyrics, sitting next to him.
Hey, sometimes people do their best work when they're sick. Look at Michael Jordan in the playoffs one year. Had 104 fever, and he won the championship with a last-minute shot or whatever. He won the game.
That's right. That's right.
Sometimes people have asked me, what's your favorite musical? And it's very hard to say because they're so different and they're so memorable. But to have seen Rex Harrison and Julie Andrews, sixth row center for My Fair Lady, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. I mean, Peter Pan, as I mentioned earlier, was the reason I got into show business. I just wanted to be around these people or do something. No idea what I could do, except I could yell, "I believe," was about it. But My Fair Lady, oh my golly, what a score! What music! What lyrics! It's just and they didn't want Rex Harrison. Jack Warner, as we mentioned in another show, didn't want Rex Harrison to do it.
Hit it to the Chinaman. I'll never forget that. Was a good one, Julian.
Yeah,
Hit it to the Chinaman.
You know, it all,
shows that you can't forget. Shows I will never forget.
Yes.
I will never forget Chorus Line. Never.
Yeah, me too.
Chorus Line may be the most electric show I've ever seen. I'll never forget La Cage aux Folles with Gene Barry and maybe George Hearn.
George Hearn.
You know, never forget that. And I will never, ever forget a show called The Wiz. The original cast of The Wiz, never forget that. And as we've, I think, mentioned before, here comes this show, which is, I'm telling you guys, this show is so great. Some of those songs are so great that people were standing and applauding while it was singing the songs. It was like a sporting event, I'm telling you. So here comes the show, and now they're going to make a movie of it. And here we go. This is the sure thing of all sure things. Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, directed by Sidney Lumet, music to be coordinated by Quincy Jones. How could it miss? Did it miss? It was beyond the bomb. It was a terrible movie. It was one of those shocking things. So there's no sure things. But when you see one of those really memorable, incredible shows on Broadway, there's no show business experience you can have quite like that.
Nothing's like it, because as great as celluloid is, it's still celluloid. It's not, you're not viscerally picking up that action or that excitement. I remember seeing Angela Lansbury and B. Arthur doing in Mame a song called Bosom Buddies. The place went nuts. It could have been Bruce Springsteen's concert. I mean, screaming and yelling, because it was just unbelievable. And they did, of course, encores because the place was going bananas.
And I saw it in Boston before it got to Broadway, and it was perfect. It was they had to do nothing to that show.
Yes.
You know, but how about here's a show of shows. You ready? Guys and Dolls. How great could it be? Guys and Dolls.
Now, who was the original cast, Arthur, on Broadway?
Easy.
Robert Alder, Vivian Blaine.
Alan Alda's father.
Right. Vivian Blaine, Sam Levine, and Stubby K, B.S. Pulley.
B.S. Pulley, that's right. Sam Levine.
Let's shoot craps.
Big Julie from Chicago.
That's right.
But the songs from that show,
I got a
horse the concept of the show itself. And how can you make a hit song with the words Vitalis and Barbasol?
But Frank Lesser did it, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah, it was a bit of a risk to cast Marlon Brando in the film, but I think the film did pretty well.
It did well. It
wasn't the show, but it did well. Yeah, you know.
Yeah, it wasn't the show. They didn't get along well. Sinatra
and Brando
and Marlon. They did not get along well at all.
So they go to Frank Lesser and say, you know, Frank, in the movie we need an extra song here. So just could you do something? He sits down and writes, yeah, sure, I'll do it. Your eyes are the eyes of a woman in love.
Yeah.
Da, 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 da. And all of a sudden there's another hit song.
I think the enjoyment of a show, especially a musical, has a lot to do with where you're sitting. I mean, Julian was saying that he was 6th row center, and I watched Grease in the very last row of the Kodak Center in Hollywood, and I did not like Grease at all. And I have a feeling part of the reasons I couldn't see anybody.
It's a tough thing to go to a musical, not be able to see or hear.
I heard, but I saw Cats on Broadway, and the Cats came into the audience, and I was sitting in the 5th row. It was mesmerizing. You
should have gone back to Greece and got better tickets, Steve.
I should have.
We saw Sweeney Todd, a brilliant show, which was booked into the wrong theater in Boston. They put it into the music hall, 3,000 seats, and it just didn't work that way. It needed to have that more of an intimate thing. Listen, you can't talk musicals without talking about Stephen Sondheim, guys. You can't. He's got a show on Broadway right now that's 30 years old, didn't work in the first place, called Merrily We Roll Along. It's killing him now.
Killing him. And
have you seen the recent one, Julian?
It will win the Tony off.
It will, yeah. Well,
yeah. There's a terrific documentary about that. It was film about Merrily We Rolled Along, made by Lonnie Price, who was one of the original stars of the play on Broadway in the 80s. But it was a sad story. you hear from the actors how it breaks their heart, but what a great ending to have this come back and kill them right now on Broadway. It's just gigantic.
Yes.
So, interesting. It can happen. Not often. Chicago is another example. Chicago originally did not do well. And they brought it back to the city center that does these 1 week revivals just for a week. And they brought it back, and it was sensational. So much so that the two producers, the Weislers, picked it up, and they said, okay, we can now really open it up. And they said, no, let's keep it just this way. Not a big musical, a small musical, and it's still running. And it's one of the longest running shows in the history of Broadway.
Yeah.
It's interesting when those things happen.
Julian, when you were producing Bullets Over Broadway, what was it like being there for the rehearsals with the dancers and the singers? Was that really exciting for you?
Tremendously so, Steve. I just was thrilled. What I was most interested in, I've never seen dancers pick up the choreography so fast. I mean, they would come in, Susan Stroman or James Gray, her assistant, would come in with a new dance number. They'd show it to them, and within, I don't know, maybe 15 minutes, they're doing it. I remembered the first 3 steps. They're doing a whole number. So that was great. To watch, to have a piano play and then get the orchestra in. What a thrill that was. To go from just a piano play I think we had 3-piece, a drum and a piano, whatever. But when we had a whole, 25, 30-piece orchestra, it was really quite something.
Given the price of hiring that orchestra and is there, again, I forgive my naivete, do they have situations now where a musical theater show will show with the music brought in digitally?
Well, they fight it. The musicians union has pretty much been able to stop most of that.
I see.
Occasionally they find a way around it, but by and large, it's still right now that. And one of the most expensive things you guys would not be shocked to hear is the arrangements of the songs, the cost of making the arrangements and then giving them out and printing it up. It's really an interesting amount of money spent on things that you wouldn't ordinarily think about. I remember I brought my mother to see it before she passed away, and she didn't pass away because of the show, but I brought my mother to see it, and in the intermission, Susan Stroman, who directed and choreographed, and Woody Allen and I would meet in the manager's office, and I came running into it. I said to my mom, I'll be back for the second act. I ran in, and Susan Stroman said, "What does your mother think of it?" I said, "My mother thinks it's sensational. She's been going to musicals for years." And Woody looks up and says, "Well, at least we got the 90-year-olds.
We had a movie represented years ago. Roger Corman had a movie called A Little Night Music from a Broadway show, which had the great song, Isn't It Rich? So it's a great song.
Send in the Clowns.
Send in the Clowns. And we're in Boston, and Barbara and I are having dinner with Roger Corman's assistant at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. And during that dinner, there's a blizzard. This was the famous blizzard in Boston was 1978. This is about 5 days before. Nobody talks about this one, but it happened. So the thing was, we were going to go over to see the show, go over to see Hal Prince, who was directing a show called On the 20th Century in the Colonial Theater. And Hal Prince was, of course, involved in Little Night Music. So Roger Corman's assistant wanted us to go to see the show and meet Hal Prince and all that, and we did. But the blizzard had happened. I mean, we got out of there. We had to walk up. There were cabs. Everything was frozen. And we went up and we met with Hal Prince in the ladies' room, which was magnificent ladies' room of the Colonial Theater. And here now is this show, which is opening night of On the 20th Century with Imogene Coca and somebody, John Cullum, I believe his name was.
Yes, it was.
We went in and saw the show. Hal Prince insisted we stay and see the show. They were going to put it on no matter what. and we sat there with 3 people in the audience because of the blizzard and saw them do this show, which went to Broadway, I'm sure, but that was also a revival.
It did, and it actually did some business. It was not a flop.
Yeah.
But Hal, I met Hal in Vienna while he was shooting that movie. He was shooting in Vienna, and they wanted me to pick it up for Paramount. The producer, Elliot Kastner, wanted me to pick it up for Paramount, and I flew there, and I saw, I guess about 35 minutes of footage, and I found it to be turgid and really not very interesting.
Yeah. Years later, I ran into Hal Prince in L.A., and I said, "Yeah, remember the ladies' room in Boston?" And we both laughed, of course.
Reminded him. Inventive staging. I mean, you talk about the early days of Mary Martin flying across the heavens as Peter Pan. I mean, I went to see Wicked in its first initial staging in San Francisco before it came to Broadway. And I was blown away by the staging. The sets were just out of this world. And that show, frankly, when I first saw Wicked, I didn't think it was that great because the songs for me weren't very memorable. But what I didn't realize is my daughter was a 10 or 11 year old at that time. When she started to hear that music, the young girls went nuts.
Steve, that's what keeps that show going, is that the young girls become mothers and they bring their daughters.
That's right.
Unbelievable pedigree that show has.
Guys, I met with Mark Platt 30 years ago plus. There was a booklet on the side of his desk that had something about the witch and all that, and that was the beginning of the development of Wicked. Now, Steve, is there any way that this movie can miss Wicked?
Well, first of all, I found it very disturbing that they're milking it with 2 movies.
They made 2 movies. They made one movie, 2 movies.
Which is just so, I mean, I'm thinking The Hobbit again. The Hobbit was like a little 150-page paperback, and they made 9 hours of show on it.
Universal does not think it can possibly miss.
It has a huge reputation, and of course that doesn't mean anything sometimes. But I think it'll be.
Could it be The Wiz, Steve?
Well, I'll give you Jersey Boys, directed by a man named Clint Eastwood. One of the biggest, and everybody. This is going to be it. Forest Lawn is filled with people who said it can't miss.
Yes, that's right.
Well, look at Richard Attenborough in a chorus line. I mean, I
don't want to. I don't want to.
All right. But go back to, listen, I was with UA. I saw this screening of Man of La Mancha. You're talking about Sophie Loren, Peter O'Toole. Are you kidding? How could it miss? It didn't. It was beyond missed. It was a terrible movie.
Sometimes the decisions on what singers to hire, even though it's just the movie, not the musical, but Les Miserables comes to the big screen and Russell Crowe's doing his own singing. Where was that decision made?
Yeah.
It was just awful.
But that's almost as bad as Pierce Brosnan in Mamma Mia trying to attempt to sing ABBA. Yes, and that was so horrible.
And yet, look at its success, Mike.
Oh boy, the movie.
Mamma Mia was amazingly successful. Yeah. And from what I heard with an interview with the director of the movie, is Pierce said, "I'll do the movie and everything as long as you dub over my singing. Have somebody voice me over," and they didn't. And
let's try this, guys.
He didn't know it until he was at the theater.
The greatest Broadway musical you ever saw. If you had just one choice and only one, what would it be? What would it be? Only one choice. Let's start with you, Mike. What do you think?
Oh, that's tough. For me, if I had to see one musical, I would actually do Hair, the original version of it.
Hair. Okay.
You just liked all that nudity at the end.
Well, yes. There's nothing wrong with that.
Steve, one musical, one only.
I always dance to Damn Yankees, so I'll see the latest incarnation of Damn Yankees.
Julian?
My Fair Lady, Rex Harrison, Julie Andrews, Stanley Holloway, Robert Coote.
Chorus line.
All right, guys. I think we exhausted musicals, my guys.
Always a lot of fun, guys.
This was great.
This is always awesome. Thanks for listening to the Tales from Hollywoodland podcast. Always remember, we couldn't do this without you. We want to hear from you guys. Please write us anytime at talesfromhollywoodland.com. Remember, you could also find Tales from Hollywoodland wherever fine podcasts are found. And now you could even find us up on our new YouTube channel at no extra cost. If you made it this far into the episode, why not subscribe and give us a thumbs up? And if you're into social media, please check out us on Instagram and on Facebook. Before we get out of here, let's check with the guys, see what's happening this week on their podcast. Julian, what do we got?
This week, we're ending with Martin Sheen, and we're starting the lovely, beautiful, talented Isabella Rossellini.
Ooh,
Marvelous.
awesome.
Marvelous.
That is
Blue
awesome.
Velvet fame.
Oh, and so much more.
And so much more. Yes.
Yes.
How about Steve? What about you, Steve?
Carolyn Pfeiffer, who was the first producer to ever hire me as a unit publicist. She talks about her new book, all about her life. She was originally Claudia Cardinale's assistant, Alain Delon's assistant, and the star of Dr. Zhivago.
Julie Christie.
No, not the man. The man.
Oh,
Omar.
the man.
Omar Sharif's
Sharif.
assistant. And then she went on to work on so many shows. She's a delightful interview, and her book is wonderful. It's called Chasing the Panther, and I highly recommend it.
And our show, Tales from Hollywoodland, we're talking independent production next week. And I'm looking at my calendar, and I see on the next week after that, I see Bloods for Dr. Harris. Oh, I'm sorry, that's not the show. That's just a note of having. Anyway, we have Elvis. We're going to do Elvis. We have some other things that are already booked, but that's great.
On behalf of Steve, Arthur, and Julian, thanks again for listening. This is your announcer, Mike Faber. We'll see you next time on Tales from Hollywoodland. Your Hollywood adventure starts right here.
Boom, boom, nice job.
Boom, 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 boom.
All right, monkeying around. Look at the picture and tell me what you see.
I see a sitcom whose cast became a real band.
Whose creators were founding members of the new Hollywood movement.
This is obviously a bunny and a chicken.
Looks like a band who sold 75 million records.
And who should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
It's a bunny and a chicken.
4 consecutive #1 albums.
A bunny and a chicken.
2 Emmy Awards.
A bunny and a chicken.
Monkeying around.
A bunny and a chicken.
Podcast about the monkeys.
A bunny and a chicken.
This has been a broadcast of the ESO Network. Be part of the crew and help support our shows by donating to our ESO Patreon or by shopping at the TeePublic store, which can all be found at www.esonetwork.com. The ESO Network, your station for all things geek.